making it over between room A and here, for those of you who were in the keynote session just then. I'd like to say, first of all, welcome to Nelson Sivalingam. Many of you will know him, particularly from his work with How Now, his book Learning at Speed, the fact that he seems to be on every conference program going and all of that stuff. But nonetheless, we love having him here. Nelson's been a great story. He's being joined this time by Penny Simpson from InRiver, who works in the field of enablement and making enablement a business critical component of the organisation she works with. So please join me in welcoming Nelson and Penny to this session. Thank you.
Thank you. You don't seem too happy about me being on the conference. It's okay, I'll bear that in mind. Hey, everyone, I'm Nelson. Before I dive in, I just want to kick off with a question. I just want to get people's sentiment about AI in the room before I spend the next 40 minutes talking to you about AI. Put your hand up if you feel like you're an AI optimist. We're going to have a great time today, guys. If you're an AI pessimist, all right, if you're just AI fatigued, just like, if one more person says AI, I'm going to hurt them. Are you in that category? Yeah. Then I'm worried for myself. But let me tell you a bit about myself. By the end of this, I'm going to tell you why we should be optimistic, but responsible in the way we harness AI. But before that, let me tell you who I am. I'm one of the founders and the CEO at How Now. We're an AI learning company. We help companies learn and upskill their people. As I mentioned, author of Learning at Speed. Anyone read Learning at Speed here? No? Well, you might be lucky enough to get a copy later on. The stand back in the exhibition. And anyone listening to our podcast, L&D Disrupts? No? Well, there you go. You just found the thing you're going to listen to when you go back home, which is we bring on incredible thinkers and pick their brain about some of the biggest challenges facing work and the employee experience. Now that's enough about who I am. This baby-faced young man with a lot more black hair is actually not that long ago in my life, but it's probably about less than 10 years ago. I know some of you are looking at it going, really? Just less than 10 years ago? But it's true. This is a photo from what I call the pre-product market fit era. How many people are familiar with the idea of product market fit? All right, I'm going to tell you. Product market fit is when you're starting a business and you're coming up with a product, but you don't know whether that product has customers who are going to value it. And so what you're doing is you iterate and iterate until you find a product that the market wants. And the reason why this concept exists is so you focus on the things that matter. Right? So you don't get distracted by anything else. You're just focused on iterating and iterating until you get to a product that people need and people want. Now, until then, you take the scenic route. You try a bunch of things, some things work, some things don't work, and then you hit product market fit. Now, you can go search product market fit, and you'll never get an explicit definition of what it is. Every definition of product market fit you read is almost like someone describing, tell me how you know when you're in love. That's what it's like. It's so abstract. You just know. But some of the things people say look out for when you're building a product is it's when people are buying faster than you could build. Right? Things are growing faster. People who get that product are passing on to other people. That's what product market fit feels like. So some of you are sitting there going, Nelson, why the hell are you telling me about product market fit? Well, once I started working with L&D teams, and I talk about this in my book, I found this mental model of a fit that you need to try to achieve that keeps you focused was just as relevant for L&D teams. And what that fit was is essentially learning challenge fit. What you're really trying to do is not get distracted by, how many buttons and great animations you've got in your learning, but a singular focus needs to be around what is the challenge you're trying to solve? And is your learning helping you solve that challenge or not? Everything else doesn't matter, and you iterate and iterate until you achieve learning challenge fit. So when you're trying to achieve learning challenge fit, you're less focused on the affinity towards the thing you've created. You don't get too attached to this beautiful program and workbook that you've created, because if it's not helping you achieve learning challenge fit, then you pivot, right? Or you iterate on what you've got. Now, what I talk about there is, okay, how do you do this? We know we need to get to learning challenge fit, but what does this look like? And so essentially, speaking to both learning scientists as well as L&D professionals, what we essentially saw was happening was two loops. And what you've got here on the right is the loop that the learner goes through, right? That's the learning experience loop. And this is essentially a consolidation of years of progress we've made in learning science, which fundamentally highlights that this is what we go through, so as a learner. So you've got the learn part of it, which is essentially associated with the knowledge that you're trying to get here. What's the facts? What's the information? What's the frameworks? What do you need them to know? But actually, quite often what we see is we stop there. But we're not rewarding people for what they know. We're rewarding people for what they do. And therefore, we need to create the space for them to be able to do that thing and get feedback from it. And that's where you have the step of practice. That's where the step between where what we often quite have now is knowledge-based learning, but we need to move towards having more skills-based learning that helps us build skills we can actually apply. Then you get to feedback. Now, actually, this feedback is two-pronged because it's feedback for the learner. So this is where they've done something, they've applied that particular skill, and we're giving them feedback to say, you could have done this better, you did this really well, and they can then take that feedback on. But that's also feedback for the learning experience designer. Because if they're not making progress and you're not seeing movement towards learning challenge fit, now you've got to go back and go, what do I need to change here? Maybe it wasn't the right learning experience or the resource. Maybe strategically there was something wrong here. So that feedback is two-way. It's for the learner and it's for the experience designer. Now we go into the second loop on the left, which is essentially the learning experience design loop. And this is where that feedback goes in. So we collect a bunch of data, qualitative and quantitative data from people who've been engaging with the learning experience, and we use that to go, okay, what worked, what didn't work? And on the back of that ideation, we build something. It could be another learning resource. It could be changing something about what we were focusing on. And then you put it out to test. And that's when you put it back out to the people who need it. Now, these two loops feed into each other to create what I call a flywheel. Now, typically what you find with this flywheel, the reason why I call it a flywheel is to turn it the first time is hard. But really the purpose of it is the more data you collect from the feedback, really the faster the flywheel will turn. Because you'll get better at understanding what's working, what's not working, getting you closer to learning challenge fit. Now, for organizations who practice this, now quite often, I speak to many organizations who struggle to go through the loop, or they're stuck at one point in the loop. But then there are many organizations who get through the loop. But it takes so much manual effort that they're not able to sustain that at scale. You might be able to do it really effectively and find learning challenge fit for one particular team, but to scale it across the entire organization to make sure you can run this same flywheel takes a lot of effort. And as a result, we don't do it. Now, what if I told you, really, the opportunity for us with AI is what required a lot of human effort to run through that flywheel. AI is able to, on its own, run through both sides of that flywheel at a speed that was just not humanly possible before. And going through that flywheel until we achieve learning challenge fit. And that's what, this is not, typically the mistake people make when they think about personalization is they just think better content recommendations. That's not what we're talking about here. And let me give you an example. So what you're seeing here is how we've used agentic AI technology to be able to deliver what I'm telling you around going through that flywheel autonomously. Now let's start from the first step there, which is learn. Now, one of the biggest changes to happen with AI is the atomic unit for personalizing learning has changed. Let me explain what I mean by that. If you look back a few years back, the atomic unit for personalization was a course or a blog, right? Or a podcast. It was an asset, an item. But the atomic unit we have now is the very next word. The next word, the next sentence that's about to come out of AI is the atomic unit. I don't need to read this 5-minute long blog anymore if only 2 lines in that blog was most relevant to me. And so what we're doing with AI now is essentially to be able to personalize that, to take out exactly the words, the lines, what you need to hear. But what AI is also able to do is adapt that to exactly your context. So let's say I'm teaching, I'm trying to help someone with building communication skills. Now, if I was trying to do that with a product manager versus a sales rep, the examples I'd give them would be very different. And that's what AI is able to do. It's able to share that knowledge, but adapt it to give you examples that are going to help you understand for a product manager versus a sales rep. It's able to adapt it to the skills that you're trying to build. Now, the key thing to think about here, though, which I'll come to later on around the transformations we need to make, is what content is driving this experience. Hold that thought, and I'll come back to it later. And then you've got practice. Now, this is the difference between essentially someone watching a video of how to ride a bike and actually being able to get on a bike and be able to ride it. And quite often, the learning opportunities that offer in our organization, they stop at the point where we show a video of someone riding a bike, but we don't go beyond that. We don't give them a bike. And so this is what AI is able to do. It's able to use your organization's context and organization's knowledge to be able to essentially, on the fly, create scenarios that are real-world opportunities for you to be able to apply that skill. And when you apply that skill, it's able to then dynamically scaffold for difficulty. If it knows you're just getting started out on this skill, it's able to dynamically scaffold for the level you're at and progressively get more difficult, introducing the right level of challenge. And again, this is a fundamental part of learning science, is having a level of difficulty and challenge in order for someone to develop skill. And AI is able to do that at an appropriate progressive level in the way we practice. It then takes that practice to give you feedback. Now, so often when I speak to organizations, one of the blockers is essentially enabling managers or to be able to give better feedback, but then also them making the time to give that feedback. You know, if I've just done something and I'm having to wait 3 weeks to get feedback from my manager, that slows down you being able to go through that flywheel. Now what AI is able to do is it's able to reference your knowledge base and your context of what you think is good and be able to give that feedback instantly. Not only give feedback, it's able to coach you. It's able to prompt you with questions to get you to reflect on how you did that thing and what could you have done better. Now that's AI doing pretty much most of that learning experience loop. Now let's flip it around to how the feedback now comes back to the learning experience design. It now knows from how you applied that skill in the practice scenario, it can evaluate your proficiency. It knows what you're good at, what you're not good at. It knows when it asks you questions based on what you answer, where you're proficient and where you're not. Now that insight around the progress you're making goes back to the learning experience design loop. Now what's incredible is that learning experience design loop, which would have in some cases taken weeks, if not months in organizations, is now happening almost instantly because of a few reasons. AI has memory. And what AI has, it's constantly retaining information about your progress, what you're doing good, what you're not doing good, to a level a human could just not remember. And it's able to use what it's remembering to be able to apply that insight to then adapt the learning. And so that learning experience design loop where I said you ideate, build, and test is now happening instantly. I do a practice right now. It will take the insights from that, and it will generate another practice scenario that is adapted to where I'm at in the progress I'm making. So what would have taken weeks and months now, that learning experience loop, is now happening in a matter of seconds, allowing us to accelerate through that flywheel. Now, all of this is happening typically in a conversation at scale, on demand, in the flow. Now, here's a bit of data. Our friends at Harvard Business ran a study to see the effectiveness of this. And they found in a group, they tested 15% had a higher perceived skill improvement using an AI coach or a tutor. 32% thought it was better personalization for their individual job roles. And the last one's staggering, because I still see, classroom training is what people's perception is of what learning looks like in the workplace because of the baggage we've carried over from traditional education. But actually, the AI coach seems to be breaking that, with over half of people who were in this research study saying they preferred the AI coach to classroom training. Now, at this point, this is where I see a lot of people's faces, and they're like, is this when Nelson's about to do an intervention and say, we should probably change our careers? That's not what this is. There's a lot of narrative around AI coming for the jobs. Now, I'm not a believer of that. I am very much the AI optimist here. But I think what AI is coming for, certainly, is the ineffective processes that we have. And if we hold on to those ineffective processes, then for sure it will come for your job. And so what we need to look at is what are the changes we're going to make. And so for the rest of the session here, I'm going to call out a few fundamental transformations that we're seeing L&D teams make and what we're recommending L&D teams make. And then I'm going to invite Penny to tell you how she's applying those transformations, and she's on that journey. So let's go through those. So the first transformation is, it's no longer about you building courses, right? This is where there's this image of you're the conductor of the orchestra and it's time for you to put down the instrument, right? Really what you're looking at here is, yes, AI can go through that flywheel, but how do you know it's doing it connected to the right capabilities that you need to build in the organization? How do you know it's aligned to your business strategy? How do you know it's aligned to the skills that you need? And this is where what you need to reflect on. You don't have to answer me, but if I ask you, do you know what capabilities you need to build for your organization this year? How many of you feel confident that you can answer that question? How many of you think you can answer that as confidently as you can answer what training program you're about to launch in the next quarter? That's what needs to change. Our job here is that strategic piece. What matters to the business? How do we make them care? How do we make sure we have the data infrastructure, we have the learning resources that we're going to plug into this ecosystem so AI can make sure it's using verified, credible, reliable learning resources that are aligned to our strategy? And it's about designing for loops, not launches. This is not about a big bang, I launched a course, let's celebrate whether people completed it or not. If AI can deliver and adapt and go for that flywheel all by itself, then like I said, it's about whether it's connected to the capabilities you want to build. And if it's not, it's your responsibility to get it back on track. This is no longer about having long project plans. This is about having iterative cycles. And those cycles are going to get shorter. As you saw, AI is going through that flywheel in seconds. So you're going to be able to get data around, are things moving in the right direction or not, much, much faster. The question is, are you ready to use those insights to be able to iterate and keep moving in the direction you need to? And then it's around coaching for application. Now, let me ask a question here. How many of you feel like you think about whether someone gets the opportunity to apply as much as you think about whether they're going to consume the learning? Quite often, this is what we see. Good to see a few hands. This is what we see. We spend, let's say, 80% of our time thinking about the consumption of learning and that particular resource or experience. But we don't think as much about the time of, are we creating enough opportunities for them to be able to apply that learning and to create those touch points? And this is where the manager plays a critical role in this. Because the manager creates the conditions for someone to be able to apply it and get that feedback in the real world. And this is where we really need to start looking at our managers as a lever for being able to drive that. Now, this is where what's happening with, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this idea of learning in the flow of work, but this is far beyond learning in the flow of work. What we're seeing now is actually learning and work merging. They're one. And so what we need to do here is frame work not as an execution problem, but we need to frame work as a learning problem. Most of you are doing it now. You're probably working on something and you go to ChatGPT or Gemini to ask a question. That's what it's going to look like now. The gap between learning and when we're applying that learning is so small now, and it's only going to get smaller. So we need to start thinking about that. Are we designing learning in a way now where we're stopping people from working and taking them away to learn? Or have we made sure we remove the friction for people to access what they need as they're working? So really the idea here is learning as they're working. Again, managers play a key role in this, acting as enablers, not as necessarily gatekeepers for whether someone can learn or not. And then it's about what you're measuring here. Typically, we're measuring an event that happened, that it completed, right? This happened. But what we're really interested in is not the dots, it's in the lines. It's the progress is what shows us whether this is working or not. And this is where we need to look at the business metric that we're trying to move. We need to be a part of the conversation of defining what good looks like and then being able to track whether we're moving in the right direction. Now, the question I would ask you is what's up there? Is if I told you you can't measure completion, would you still be able to prove you're having a meaningful impact on the organization? And if you can't, then that's the problem. And the last one here extends on what I just said. Is if you're still struggling to answer the question when a CFO asks you about ROI, around the value that you've created, then that's the problem. Now, this is where what we need to transform to is our ability to be able to connect the dots between the data we're tracking from a learning perspective and connecting that back to other business metrics. Now, an interesting story here is we introduced an AI analyst for managers to be able to access learning and skills data. One of the interesting insights that came out of it is managers didn't know what questions to ask. They could ask this analyst any question they wanted, but they still didn't know what question to ask. And then they didn't know how to make sense out of the data that they were getting. That tells you the role L&D can play here in coaching people to understand what matters, what questions should we be asking. We play a key role in L&D here of making sense out of things. How do we connect this insight to a decision that's going to make a difference in the organization? Now, this is what that looks like. This is the 6 key transformations that we're seeing across L&D. I'll give you a moment to take your pictures. Now, this is what we think is going to be a large part of the transformation that L&D are going to go through in their next chapter. But what we wanted to do today is bring someone who I admire for what work Penny does, both from a learning and an enablement perspective, but also to show what it actually looks like in a real company. And this is not about a finished story, but this is about someone who's in the middle of shaping a new one. And so join me in welcoming Penny from In River up so I can grill her. Penny, we'll start with an easy question. What does In River do?
So In River is actually, they work in the PIM space. We're a technology company. And PIM means Product Information Management. So just like you might have a CRM, which is customer information management, if you like, this is about product. So again, very similar to some of the stuff we've been talking about is getting that information to people in marketplaces that is accurate, that is in time, and think about your Amazon marketplaces, your Facebooks, etc. Essentially, that is what we kind of manage, is that data to make sure it's up to date, it's current, it's accurate, and that all the things we're doing online, when we're on our Amazon checking our products and going, oh, we'll take that, that's data and assets that are all being fed from things like your PIM product.
Cool. Before we come to some of the changes you're making and some of the tactical changes you've made, let's come back to why did you think you had to change? What was the problem you're seeing that thought, I have to change my approach here?
Yeah, so a lot of the time in companies that I work at, they tend to be sort of startup, scale up. So we're building from nothing, right? So the big priority for us is around building at scale, but also meeting people in the place that they work. And I know that Nelson's mentioned that already, and we kind of go, well, what does that really mean? But think about today and how people actually learn. All of us have probably Googled something at some point today, or YouTube, or whatever it is. That is actually a learning moment. And in our current organization where we're at right now is, well, when I joined, it's only been a year, just had my year anniversary, so I'm very excited. There's a lot that's happened, was around actually from an enablement perspective, can I meet all the people that have all these different requirements, right, in the place and in time, and do it at scale that's going to be personal to them and actually drive performance. That's the big thing for us, because otherwise, why aren't we doing it?
And I think that driving performance and that kind of outcome is what's kind of driven all of the changes around what you're laying the infrastructure for personalizing. Just to pick a couple of the ones that you've done. So the interesting change was you used to have like a content academy team, which you've kind of changed the approach and the charter for that. So talk to us about the changes you've made.
Yeah, so very controversial, some people might think. So you'll hear that I use the word enablement. So I actually come from an L&D and sales enablement background. So I've done both. I actually think they should all be one, because they're actually all learning, but it's the enablement bit. So when I walked into the business, we had the academy team very much focused on our product training and e-learning and the LMS that we were using at the time. But that was mainly for our customers and our partners. We didn't really do anything internally either. So one of the things we've done is actually centralized learning, or the enablement function. So now actually our customers are actually made up of our own people, our actual customers, and our partners. Because guess what? There's a lot of commonality between them. So now we can start working a bit more efficiently and looking at building with scale in mind, but also reuse in mind as well. And it allows us to adopt common languages and practices, and there's consistency in there. So right now, we're actually literally on the cusp, like 2 months, of transforming and transitioning into the centralized enablement function. So the 3 people who are in my team now are actually all content designers, as in that's their original status or role. And instead what we've done is we've restructured the team to be lines of service. So we have commercial enablement partner, we have our customer enablement partner, and our product enablement partner. And we're literally just starting that now, so we're kind of going through that.
And was there any friction, any pushback in changing this from either the people who were changing their roles or from the business in terms of changing your approach?
Good news is no. From the people in the team, I had to sell it in first to our leadership team, right? Because it is a strategic shift, and there has to be a real justification as to why we're doing this. Like, how is this going to drive, again, performance and outcome, right? How is this going to make us sell more, be a bigger brand, all those sorts of things. So having that, building that strategy out to kind of demonstrate how this is going to work, and getting their buy-in and getting that kind of yes, good to go. Right now you can start using, moving the team around. The team themselves though, actually really kind of bought into it. So we actually got together for the first time in human form, which is quite exciting. Someone flew all the way from the Philippines over, someone from Greece, and the other person remoted in from Holland. So we're definitely a multicultural team. And we actually had our own first enablement kickoff, where we got together and we actually worked through what is our purpose, what is our vision, making sure that we were all aligned and addressing the big challenges, like what is it that's frustrating us, what's not working, what do we need to stop doing, what do we need to fix, and what do we need to start doing. And being very, very specific and targeted on that, and actually solving some of those issues that are getting in the way, or I call it noise, to help us to step out from the curtain and not be a content machine. I was like, those days are gone. You can stop doing all that. Now we're focusing on how are we actually driving impact in our business, and actually really showing that we're more than just content out there.
And what I liked about it is in this charter that you set up, you've got these operating principles. Can you talk to some of those operating principles?
Yeah, so we've stepped away from being those kind of, we hear the phrase order takers, but, oh, we need a quick course on this. My kind of response to that is, okay, let's chat about that first. Let me understand why you think you need a course on this, etc. Because to me, the course might be the solution. So you've already started at the end, which is not helpful. So what we're doing now, some of our principles are we do a more social learning approach. So we leverage our subject matter experts. The people in the enablement team do not need to be the experts on those topics. Their role instead is to curate an experience that is going to help those outcomes and solve that problem, whether it's an individual problem or a team problem or potentially even a business problem, because it can be quite widespread. So that's a core thing there. And as part of that, it's also us ensuring our processes that we remove any barriers to work with those subject matter experts, because that can be quite challenging in terms of their availabilities and their priorities. So making sure that what we are focusing on is actually helping them, which makes them want to come back and utilize our products and services that we offer as a team. So those are the core things there. It's also around the AI, the big two letters in the room, in that we need to make sure as a team that we are taking advantage of every opportunity to leverage technology to either automate, to again remove any barriers for communication, us actually being out there in the field, and making sure that we ourselves are actually educating ourselves. I always make the joke of like learning people are always the last people to learn because we're so busy worried about everyone else's learning. We've now actually set up a monthly cadence called Enabling Enablement, where everyone in the team, and we have like a rolling sort of agenda, we'll come back and share, this is our findings, this is what we found worked, and actually making sure everyone's up to speed. So we kind of work with a clear purpose, but we're also upskilling ourselves in preparation for further AI stuff that's coming.
One of the core things around the transformations that we're seeing is that alignment with the broader business and other stakeholders. What's been your approach to kind of collaborating with other functions? It's quite often when we talk to different L&D professionals, they might not have that relationship with other departments to be able to either get the data to see whether it's working or not, or to really ask the questions around, what is the actual challenge and being able to align it with that. What's been your approach to kind of invite that collaboration?
Yeah, so I know it's going to sound maybe not that positive, but think about us, ourselves and everyone else. It's always about what's in it for them, right? So we have to then find out what that is. So for an enablement strategy for the next year, for example, in terms of our core objectives or OKRs, my roadmap is based on everybody else's roadmap, because that's what informs and feeds what we're going to be focusing on. And if you kind of go with that approach, what it will do is it'll mean that whatever you're doing is actually going to be impacting those different people and different departments. My biggest thing is that actually going out, even the small old school style of setting up meetings and having conversations, like, do you actually understand those areas of the business? You don't have to know all the mechanics and everything in there, but at least get an understanding of, okay, that's how that sort of area of business functions. What are your challenges? What's keeping you up at night? What are you focusing on for next year? Just you having those conversations. I have regular meetings like set up fortnightly, educating my American people to not say bi-weekly. I'm sure that's incorrect, but anyway. But fortnightly catch-ups with our leaders to understand what that is, what's going on in the workspace, and then feeding that within the team. But also within my team, I'm like, why aren't you talking to the managers, the team leads, etc.? Like making sure that we have clear lines of communication. And then also being comfortable with not doing everything, because you can't. So instead, we focus on where can we have the biggest impact? Is there commonality amongst the different roadmaps? Brilliant. Okay, so that means I can do a 2-for-1 or even a 3-for-1, and I can work more efficiently.
I'm going to open up the questions to the floor in a bit, but just to kind of, I guess, move a bit more onto AI, because a lot of this is, like I said, there's a large part of harnessing AI is actually in the humans getting ready to harness AI, right? Both from a strategic perspective, creating the conditions for it, for you to be able to do it. What's been the approach to kind of drive that AI adoption, I guess, starting from your own team, and creating the openness for that and more broadly across the organization?
So for me, on a personal level, I don't know about you guys, I hate admin. If I can get some machine to do it for me, I'm all over it. So for me, I naturally gravitate towards technology. So when I joined in River, the first thing for me as a priority was ensuring I had an ecosystem in terms of technology that can allow me to build stuff at scale, because I know I'm going to need to move fast, but with purpose. So bringing in and actually replacing the LMS we had, making sure it was modern, that it had the capabilities for AI, including your sort of standard content libraries, if you like, as well. I mean, if someone else has built it, I'm happy to use it. But then also it's other technologies that I'm kind of bringing in as well, which are very, very all about being able to meet people in places. So it's almost like I'm kind of setting up the infrastructure, so that then when I start doing stuff, it's going out and communicating. The other piece around AI that we're doing is actually understanding and developing a strategy. So just to clarify what we mean by that is we're a tech company, so it's very easy to sit and go, oh, we need to be AI-led, and then we're all over it, right? Apparently. But the question I ask is, well, what does that mean? Like, I don't understand what that means. Like, are we talking about just our product? Well, what about our people? Do our people have the skills that are required in order for us to drive those company goals? But those goals are defined by that strategy, right? So for now, for example, our Chief People Officer is currently doing the investigation on that and actually understanding, okay, let's define what that strategy is. Once we have that, then I can then look at that and go, okay, this is how I know we can impact that. And that's the next thing we're kind of doing right now. Also enabling the team, as I mentioned, having these enablement stuff. Just these small things, preparing the team and ensuring that our processes and things we've got in place, we're leveraging that and talking to that, means that we're in a much more informed position to then help the wider business. But we're getting our house in order.
I like it. Any questions? Yeah? Up front, there's a microphone coming in.
Hey, thank you. I've got curiosity about future-proofing AI. So we're all rushing to bring it in, trying to make sure it's the right fit for our businesses and things like that. And I think this curiosity comes from a climate change project that I've just done as a kind of known unknown for AI, because lots of businesses around the world now are tackling carbon taxes for resource-intensive processes in manufacturing their products. And AI is quite a resource-intensive thing to use, to produce, to manage, in terms of cooling and the data and all that kind of stuff. And how do you foresee that impacting ROI in the future if the lens, the climate change lens, as well as AI?
I can think. Yeah. So, see, my take on it is right now there is a problem, right? But what's happening here, it's a bit like if you look at any growth of technology, it's a bit like where the inefficiencies and even the lack of profit making is almost secondary. What they're trying to do is get to a point where you've iterated, where it's delivering value that people value, right? They're willing to pay for it and you can generate money out of it. Now, when it becomes an obstacle, where now it's eating into the margin, and I actually do think this is not, what will force the right behavior here isn't people who want to do good for the environment. I think they'll realize it's bad for business, right? It's eating into their margin, and that's what will drive it, right? And so, as an optimist, I actually think this technology will help us solve this problem, right? Of looking at more environmentally effective and efficient ways of being able to address this. But there's an incredible book, by the way, if you like reading it. It's called Power and Progress, right? And what it does is it reviews the last 1,000 years of technology innovation. And what you learn from the last 1,000 years is if it's left to just the innovators to do it, the benefit of great technology would be limited just to the elite. So it requires pressure from other stakeholders to be able to drive it. And I think that's what's important. So we could do that from what we choose to buy. right? If there is a provider who's taking a more sustainable, environmentally friendly approach to it, are we prioritizing giving our money to them versus others? So the market needs to drive that change. It's not going to happen just from the people who are innovating, is my take on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. A company before I was at InRiver, that was a huge question that came up because they were all about digital transformation, and there was questions around that. So there was a lot of work that went into just understanding what their policy was on that. And I think it's worth having those conversations. But I agree. I think that the innovation piece will actually drive it to get better. So you kind of need it to sort of be happening now.
I think that is happening in other industries, but it's being backed up by it's not happening backed up. And the taxes are coming from the businesses, making everything more expensive.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have turned into a pumpkin, metaphorically speaking, within the context of a conference. Would you join me please in thanking Nelson Sivalingam and Penny Simpson?